we're living as though we're using up every year the resources of 3 planets. And so I think the answer to that is I recently wrote a blog on the Compass website, because it came out of actually a long video interview I did with them. And it was one of those long half-hour videos, and you think, is anyone actually going to watch to the end of this? But we actually, in the discussion that I had with the interviewer, I said, she asked me, what's the main single point we have to get across? And I said, I think what we have to explain is our current economic system, the current way we do things, is broken. We can't just tinker a bit at the edges. We can't just change this lever and that lever and change the interest rates and change, slightly the rules about banks and think that everything will be fine. Our current system is broken and we have to radically change it. And she actually got quite excited and she thought that was a really good thing. And so I thought, let's explore that a bit. And that's what I did in Compass statement and what I want to do a little bit this afternoon. I'm only going to speak for about 20 minutes or so and then allow plenty of time for questions, because I always think the questions is more fun bit, really. So we've got this broken system, and we're standing here in a beautiful green environment, and I was actually sitting at Ashford Station, which isn't a beautiful green environment, but watching sparrows picking up the spilled food, and of course you never see a sparrow in London these days. So around here, it looks pretty good, but actually when you start to read a bit of history and a bit of people's accounts from even 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, the kind of accounts of natural abundance that they describe, we just have nothing left like that now. We have figures. I'm always trying to talk about cuddly animals, and I rather like hedgehogs. And it has been pointed out to me that hedgehogs aren't actually cuddly animals, but I think people still think of them that way. Our hedgehog numbers have just absolutely plummeted. Our numbers of moths, our numbers of butterflies, so many things in the natural world, our whole biodiversity is just collapsing. And obviously we all talk an enormous amount about climate change, and we passed that absolutely, it's only a number in Norway, but also it's a huge milestone of 400 parts per million just recently. And that's only 1 part per million worse than 399, but it's still a pretty scary landmark of where we're at. But it's also the state of our oceans, the amount of plastic pollution, the amount of chemical pollution, the way in which we've fished our oceans, so many species fished almost to extinction, and the state of our freshwater supplies. The state that we've got our environment in with our current economic system, we can't keep going that way. But it's also a question of economics. So much of this is built on so much exploitation. And that economic exploitation and the environmental exploitation go together. If we think about your classic, quote-unquote, cheap £5 t-shirt on the high street, we think about what's gone into that t-shirt. And maybe we think about it starting out as cotton in Azerbaijan, where they're using up vast amounts of water, it's not replaceable, and some 10-year-old boy who should be in the classroom, but is instead being forced into the fields to pick that cotton. That cotton is then shipped over to China using fossil fuel, where a poorly paid exploited worker in a factory that dumps its dyes into the nearest river and all the rest of it, spins it into cloth. It then goes down to perhaps somewhere like Bangladesh. And we all know about something recently, it's all been very much highlighted about the factory conditions in Bangladesh. But again, we're talking about the fossil fuels down to Bangladesh, the exploitation of the worker there. And very often we'll find under our current sort of system, it might then get shipped off somewhere else, maybe to India, to get some embroidery sewn on it. Because it's marginally cheaper to do that in that place in India. And then it goes on a boat to come back here to Britain. And that's our cheap £5 t-shirt. And that really has been the whole model of globalisation, the whole way we've been structuring our economy. And we've been told, it's fine, we don't have to make that t-shirt in Britain, because they can do it so cheaply over there. And we here in Britain, we can just focus on the financial industries, because we're so good at finance. We're so good at finance, we managed to break the whole global economy. We can do arms manufacturing. such a lot of good jobs in arms manufacturing. You know, we can agree to £4 billion worth of arms export contracts to Saudi Arabia. Arguably the worst human rights abusing regime in the world, that we are going out of our way to do everything possible to support. And we can do pharmaceuticals. You know, there's some of the pharmaceuticals are things we need to do, but there's an awful lot of stuff that, you know, most of the major pharmaceutical companies have been fined because they've been, you know, doing the wrong thing. So that's what Britain, under our old economic model, we're going to do finance, arms industry and pharmaceuticals. And everything else we can leave to the rest of the world and we'll just import. And it's very clear that that's a model that's not working anymore. Another part of the model that we've been seeing that isn't working is the idea that we can base this all around big multinational companies. There's our town needs a boost. We can build a brand new out-of-town supermarket on the edge of town. You'll read it on the front page of the local paper. 200 jobs promised. Now, what will those jobs be? Of course, we all know that they're going to be minimum wage or something very close to it. Quite a lot of them will be 0 hours contracts. Does everyone know what 0 hours contracts are? Okay, I'm getting some shakes heads, so I'll divert for a second into 0 hours contracts because it's something we're doing a lot of work campaigning against at the moment, and it's really important. A 0 hours contract means that you agree as a worker to be available for, say, 40 hours a week between 6 and 10, Monday to Friday, but you don't know on any given week, or sometimes on any given day, how many hours work you're going to get. You might get to the end of the week and have got 0 hours and get paid £0. Or you might, if you're lucky, get to the end of the week and got 40 hours and been paid something like a minimum wage. And I was talking about this in Oxford recently, and one of the students there came up to me afterwards and said he had a mate who'd left university and who had a 0 hours contract where he was being called at 6 a.m. every morning to be told whether he had work that day. You know, this was a young lad in his early 20s, and the student was saying to me, he hasn't even got a social life. But in many ways, of course, that's not the biggest of his problems by any means. He doesn't get to the end of the week knowing whether he's going to get the money to pay the rent, the money to buy food, any of those things. We've got these 0 hours contracts. So that's a diversion on 0 hours contracts, which is, it used to be they were only sort of in warehouse jobs and retail jobs, but increasingly we're seeing 0 hours contracts in care jobs, in medical workers, nurses and doctors, in accountants. It's sliding right up through what we think of as the professional scale, these 0 hours contracts.
Higher education, Natalie.
Higher teaching, okay, yeah, I can keep going. and it is worth pointing that out because, you know, these are our teachers, the people who are teaching our young people, who don't know if they're going to be able to pay the rent this week. And that's you know, the reality of it is. But to go back to where I was in terms of the economic model, this supermarket on the edge of town, we have this multinational company that instead, you know, it's creating 200 jobs. But the question that no one ever asked, and do try and get your local journalist to ask it if you possibly can, is what's the net impact on jobs? It might theoretically be creating 200 jobs, but how many jobs is it actually wrecking? How many, you know, the local butcher survived the experience, the local fishmonger, if he's lucky enough still to have one, the local greengrocer. And if they all go, will the local signwriter survive? Because Tesco or Sainsbury's won't employ your local signwriter to stick up their signs, they'll have a national contractor. What about the local accountant, who usually does the books for all the small businesses? Do you think about how a supermarket, a big multinational company, can just utterly hollow out a town and take away that whole local economy, and you've got practically nothing left except that out-of-town superstore? And so, you know, we're talking about the new economic model. What we need to do is build strong local economies, built around local shops, local businesses, local cooperatives, all working together, providing with each other's business, and seeing money going around and round in the town.